Welcome to What's Left, a weekly political discussion challenging the mainstream left. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-host, teacher and socialist Andy Lipson and socialist Kenny Cepeda. We're online at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find that link to our site in the episode notes. You can also find our personal social media handle, well, mine, as at Don Eduardo Barca on Instagram. Please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications, and share your favorite episode where we found this episode. And if you're interested in any of the shirts that we also we can have in order, you can always contact Andy. Mm-hmm. All right, Andy, I am in a different area of the world. I will leave it at that. And I would like for people to do Easter egg hunting and see where I'm at. So leave it to the audience. They've seen this background before plenty of times, so don't say anything. Andy, you're going to say something before we go into our topic of today. What would you like to share with us?
Yeah. I mean, what we're going to be talking about is going to be a little dark, I think, sometimes a little intense. But I want to share something that I think is more fun. I was telling Eduardo and Kenny before we started recording that it has now been revealed among a number of students that Mr. Libson has a What's Left. He has a podcast. I'm like, what's your podcast called? And it's like, What's Left? And they were like, what's that about? And that's a very challenging thing to try to explain to a sixth grader, what does What's Left mean? What is What's Left about? But the students have gotten very interested in this. And I have two students in particular who are brothers, Jacob and David, who have been bothering me to shout them out, to say, mention us on the episode. So Jacob, David, hi. I'm glad you have found our episodes. One of the things they were really interested in was, like, they asked, do I curse on this episode or these episodes? And of course, we all know I don't.
I do. I watch my language.
No, but I said I do curse sometimes. And so the thing they've been doing is, if you remember our Christmas episode when we were saying we don't have an episode, and Brandy and my mom were behind me when I was at Dallas, I think I said shit there. And so Jacob's literally on his phone playing back those lines to me, Mr. Lipson, you cursed. So it's pretty crazy, but very funny. And one of the students actually sent us a message on our how, Eduardo, we have a contact thing on WebNode?
Yes. Right.
Yeah. Well, one of them wrote me a message. I think I'm going to read it. It's crazy middle school speak. It was like this. Maybe I'll actually show it to you, so while you see it, so it makes it, you can even see how insane the generation gap. That's what I would call this. Let's see. So they wrote, their name was John Doe. And it was anonymous at Gmail. I know who this kid is. This is Diego. So I identified him later. And he goes, hello, I saw a couple of your episodes, but I have to say, if Andy was a science teacher, did he watch Skibbity Toilet? Or is he saucy with the drip? Does he moo to Sigma edits? Just a question from a fellow Skibbity Rizzler.
Oh my.
Is that not just a mess of words? And I don't even know what to make of it. I'll just say this. Skibbity Toilet is a YouTube show with somebody's head who pops out of a toilet and they say a bunch of crazy stuff. I do know that. I found that out. And drip is like how you dress.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And saucy dress. I don't know saucy with the drip would be. Is that dressing good or dressing bad? So, but anyway, it's been interesting this week for people to be like, tell us about your podcast. You got a podcast? Do you make a lot of money? It's like, so I'm saying hi officially to Jacob and David. Also, Genesis wanted me to mention her. And I will request David and Jacob to, I think you can take your masks off now, because I think we're well past our COVID stuff. So that's my request to you, Jacob and David. Stop wearing your masks all
the time. Well, thanks. And big shout out to your students then. All right, let's get to business then.
Yep.
Kenny, what's today's topic?
So, yeah, a lot has happened the last 5 days or so. Libson originally reached out to me, to see if you kind of brought that up, that you brought attention to the fact that Iran had announced a missile attack heading to Israel that would arrive in a number of hours, and in response to an attack that Israel did a couple weeks before, right? Like April 1st, I believe, when they bombed a Iranian embassy in Syria, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of top colonels or generals were killed along with other people. And as a response to the Hamas attack, is my understanding, right? Like supposedly these generals might have had a part in organizing the October 7 attacks, right? And so that's the claim. But yeah, so that these are major news. It's been covered everywhere. The missiles and the ballistic missiles, drones arrived after Iran announced, that they would arrive, which I found very strange, right? Like why do you announced that missiles are going to land in a few hours? In my understanding also is that they announced they let Israel know that they would attack 3 days prior to that as well. So they gave plenty of notice before their attack, responding to the Israeli actions. And so obviously this means a lot in the world, and I think this is what we're going to try to do here, try to make sense of this situation. What does it mean for the world affairs, the region, and what kind of stuff do we make? Do we understand from this? Because like the media says one thing, and we want to see what we make of it. And so maybe I don't know if you guys wanted to add anything to what happened that is relevant for context for people.
One thing I'll add is the things that were shot were mostly drones, a few hundred drones. There were missiles that go much faster. The drones go slow and the missiles go faster. Hypersonic missiles were not used, from what I heard, but subsonic or pretty fast missiles were. And in addition to the Iron Dome being activated, U.S. planes, British planes, and Jordanian planes were used to shoot down a lot of these things along the way. But stuff definitely got through and hit. The targets were supposedly all military targets, and the thing that got hit the most was an air base, a military base, and I can't remember the name. It begins with an N. A military base in Israel, but it's supposedly a very well protected military base, and so it's a big deal that it actually got hit. And of course, then there's the story of one side saying, "What a complete failure! We shot all the missiles down," and others saying, "No, this was a pretty significant event that took place." And then, of course, from the West, the outrage about how dare Iran do this. This is completely disproportionate. But those are just maybe the only other things I would say are features of the event, and now people wondering what Israel's going to do in response.
Right, and there's a promise, right, from Israel to retaliate. They have a response to those attacks. So we're just on the verge of, I don't know what we're going to call this, but there is everyone's in waiting what's going to happen.
Yep.
I think the other significant thing to bring up is that this is the first act of its kind coming from Iran towards Israel, right? Like they've never attacked Israel in this form, which is open warfare, right? Basically, because they have had back and forth undercover stuff, right? And so this is the first time they attacked Israel's territory in mass,
right,
with drones and missiles.
to be clear, like the back and forth is Israel has done a lot to destroy Iranian stuff in other countries, assassinate, generals or nuclear scientists and things like that. So they've done a lot of like Mossad kind of stuff. And then, of course, Iran is accused, and I do think they have proxies, of threatening and messing with Israel through its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I'd be curious about, and this is maybe a way I didn't really, because we talked actually about this in our group, Workers and Students for Choice. And one of the things actually we spent most of the time talking about, or some of the time talking about, was how we felt when we heard this news. And I want to, is that okay if we take a little time on that?
I think it's important.
Yeah.
Do you want to start or?
Yeah, I think I will. So it was a really strange experience to hear it. Now there's people who listen to us who believe that nuclear war is not really on the horizon, that it's going to be used as a threat to push a different agenda, a bad agenda, but nuclear war is not on the table. The ruling classes of the globe, the globalists, won't let that happen, or they're using it like as a psyop. Okay, I get it. I don't agree with that, but I think for those of us, and I'm one of those people who actually sees global war and the threat of nuclear war as kind of inevitable as a result of capitalism, unless we have a revolution. This was odd because it was a very strange feeling, because to hear about these things being sent into the air and then to wait in time to see what's going to happen, I feel like was almost mini preparation for hearing about missiles being sent to where I live, and knowing, well, here they come, you've got to get ready now, number one, I really feel like this is a big event that has taken place. This is another turn of the screw in terms of getting us closer to this thing that I do fear, global world war and nuclear war. And I feel that we took a decisive step closer to that. And it was a kind of strange out-of-bodiness for me to experience a moment of like, this is what it's like to wait for something awful to happen. Not because I'm against what Iran does. I understand what they did, and I don't support it. It's capitalist war, but I certainly understand in the rules of warfare. I get what Iran is doing, and it was just, and in addition to just feeling strange and giving me a premonition of what it might feel like to get to that point where the world is going to end in a way, but from nuclear war. Brandy and I definitely started re-looking at our plans for what do we do if we need to leave quickly in our city, because we want to get away from the city. And it definitely motivated us to kind of get more concrete on that. So it really felt in my bones like something significant was happening. And there's no way to shake that off. And I don't know, I guess that's what I would say about it.
Eduardo, do you want to?
Yeah. I have often felt in other episodes that we've discussed about children and just the future that we plan, have said at times that it's hard for me to conceive the idea of people beginning families because of the threat of World War III. And our planet currently is experiencing lots of contaminated water, there are like 90 different chemicals that are already in our bodies, and we have polluted air, we have animals going extinct, we have a lot of places that are hard to find refuge if we were to leave. Major cities are under threat. If I'm saying it right. And when I see this on the news, the first thing in my feed, in whatever I'm listening to on podcasts, or if I'm scrolling through news to be updated day to day, even if I don't do it, someone will inform me. Obviously, this became news even in Colombia. It just confirms for me that the feeling that I have to just and not think selfishly about my own desires, which is to do things like have a creative career, or be a potential foster parent, or be or travel and do my thing. It just doesn't feel like I can be selfish for myself. It feels like I have to be involved in community work action, because even if my small little piece of self is maybe not moving much, it's my attempt to try to do something and not sit back. And that's how I feel. I think I have journals as a kid writing about living on some ranch far away, isolated, and growing my own food and living a rural life. And I don't see I can do something like that. I feel like I have to live in a city where there are people and take over a city. Do you know what I mean? And that's how I feel with people, working class folks taking over a city, taking over buildings, taking over schools, and that requires me to be in a city. I think that's my belief, because this is where organizing efforts can happen and can have ripple effects into rural areas. I find cities are the places to be, whether it's conservative or liberal. It's not necessarily one or the other anymore for me. It's organizing with people who want to do something collectively. And so when I think about this, I think about how I feel, I feel kind of disheartened that I'm going to have to rethink about my own desires to do something different. And that's just the way I think about it. And I don't see how beginning new families, I mean, I give lots of good luck to people who are trying to begin new families. No, I don't mean it to. No, yeah. I think Kenny knows this about me before Kenny had a baby. I've always said this. It's challenging to conceive the idea for me, because we're talking about how I feel about it. To begin a new family with the onslaught of terror, that's how I feel about it. And I don't say terror like terrorist in Middle East, and that's the boogie person trying to keep our homeland security. I'm talking about terror from the USA.
Yep.
That's the real terror I see. Terror from Israel. Mm-hmm. Terror from, these big gangsters on a global scale. Those are the terrorists to me. And that's what I'm afraid of. Not some person crossing the border. That's not my terror. It's people who have the red button, so to speak. It's the president, whether it be Trump or Biden. Those are the terrorists I'm afraid of, what they're trying to do. And those are the people I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of Netanyahu. I'm afraid of China. Not because of I live, in the West. It's just because I'm afraid of big government players messing with our lives and scaring us and talking about things that you are just describing, Andy, thinking about plans to move. And those are those ideas come up because of what our governments are doing. And so that's how I feel about all of this.
So yeah, when Libsyn, you texted the group about what had happened, I tried to take a peek at the news, and so it caught me by surprise, and I immediately after you said it, I went online and tried to see, and I found it strange that they said this is gonna arrive in a few hours. It wasn't Iran just hit Israel. And maybe it's a little bit of like ignorance in terms of how long it takes, a ballistic missile that, I didn't know what type of missiles, I had to inform myself in the process of trying to understand this. So at the time, I did say in my mind, here we go. And I told my partner, and she's like, this is scary. If for some reason I remain calm, and the main reason is the fact that Iran announced it with plenty of notice, right? Even though it was shoved in our face. And I'm also very skeptical, right? When news are in every major news media, I'm very skeptical automatically. And so, but there is still in the back of my mind this uneasiness, right? Like, what kind of dominoes would this start to, tip over? And because that we've talked about that scenario, right? Like that's that in this system, in capitalism, it's hard to predict. We just like we just I tend to talk at least like that the road just leads to one possible end, and it's warfare, right? Because it's not about sharing, it's not about coexisting, it's about who dominates the table, the game, the chessboard. And so I didn't think that Iran was gonna cause like the end game, and or Israel really, like because in the back of my mind, the people who are gonna put a definite end to this game or this hand, if you will be the major powers. It's not gonna be Iran. It's not gonna be Israel. They will factor in somehow, and they will. And I think this is a major event that has revealed something to us. And so, but I mean, just talking about my emotions, I just sat and waited. I didn't panic, just mainly because of the advance notice. And uh, that to me gave me pause. And I wanted to see what was more behind it, because if you're gonna really want to harm your opponent, you don't tell them I'm gonna harm you in 3 hour time. So that was the thing that gave me pause. And so but it does trigger all these conversations that you brought up, like what do we do? We have a baby, she's 10 months, and so in the back of my mind I think how are we gonna feed the baby? If and forget like just the initiation of nuclear war, but just a conflict in that area can fuck the world global economy. And sorry for cursing to your young viewers, but it can mess with the world economy in ways that you don't know. And there may be players in the background who might have an incentive that I don't understand yet, right? Just like the pandemic, like we listen to Fabio Vighi, or if you read his articles, he has an argument that the pandemic had a more of an economic aspect, massive economic aspect to it than anything health related. And so, and I tend to lean on that because I do see that the world economy is fucking, the capitalist system is in turmoil. And they're trying to plug the instability with many things. And so I don't know how these games might factor in, but I do know this, that and maybe this will lead us to the rest of the conversation, but that what Iran did reveal to the world the new modalities of warfare in ways that they haven't been revealed, because they've been, the world, or at least America, I don't know the world, because America, we're full of propaganda. We see a little bit of what is really happening in the world. We don't have, like, the masses in the US don't have a sense of the tremendous carnage that has happened in Ukraine, of the U.S. through the proxy in Ukraine, and the Russians, and the amount of carnage that has happened through the use of drones, through the use of missiles. And so beyond revealing the weak hand of Israel, what Iran did is reveal this is how warfare is going to happen. And yes, we sent 300 drones and missiles, and most of them are going to get stopped. But if we want to hurt you, we will hurt you, and we will make it rain hell. And again, Iran is a small player in this. Iran is, they have the capacity to, yes, respond to Israel, but Iran is not Russia. Iran is not the U.S. And so, but again, they were forced, just like Russia was kind of forced to move into Ukraine. They were forced to respond to Israel to expose the weak hand of the West and Israel. But that doesn't mean victory for those who take a position of yes, the U.S. is weak, and that to me is scarier actually, because exposing the weak hand means that the people, Israel and the U.S., Israel being essentially a standing army of the U.S., that the technology they thought they could rely on, they can't, because this is something Scott Ritter talks plenty about right now, of how, right, like the U.S. Israeli technology did stop a lot of the missiles, but that was planned. And Iran didn't even use its best technology, and yet they were able to hit some of the most well-protected, according to Scott Ritter, some of the most well-protected places on Earth with the best technology, with radar systems, with anti-ballistic missile technology, with radar, bunch of stuff, and yet they were able to, make a point. But you don't read that in the mainstream. You have to dig behind and to see that there was a massive exposure of the weakness of the people who are supposed to be the dominant hand. And so now they're going to have to do something to show that, they can still control the game board. And so that's what's scary here to me. And so that's what the stuff that that I waited after the initial reaction. I tried to not have an emotional reaction, because I don't think that's how a nuclear war is going to happen. And just one more point, and I don't know what's going to come first. The scenario that you're talking about, Lipson, right? Nuclear war, that, in a blink of an eye, something major that changes everything drastically happens, or something that, like Eduardo is saying, that's also scary as hell. The news they're pulling on us, the working people of the world, through the lies, through the constant exposure to, to things to scare us into submission, right? Because, like this news, the way they're portraying the U.S., the end result is not to try to make people, be scared of the U.S. state. What they're trying to do is make the American people scared of the Iranian state, so they accept the news that the U.S. is putting on its own people.
I just want to say that there's breaking news as we are recording. Israeli missiles hit site in Iran. Explosions heard in Isfahan. I think that's how you say it. Isfahan. So there are, just as of right now. So Israeli missiles. This Al Jazeera. Israeli missiles have hit a site in Iran. According to the U.S. broadcaster ABC News, the Iranian state television reported explosions in Isfahan. Israel had promised to respond after Iran last Saturday launched a barrage of drones and missiles in the country. The United States and a number of European countries have been calling on Israel not to respond. More details to come.
Right. That's a very big deal. There were questions about what if Israel was going to respond. I think everyone knows they have to respond for what the reasons Kenny says, that if you don't respond, then you are surrendering. You are surrendering your place as the dominant hegemon. And the United States and Israel are working together here. Israel is an agent of the United States to help U.S. maintain and project its hegemony over the globe, which is being challenged in a big way. In the same way that Israeli invincibility is being exposed, so is U.S. invincibility being exposed, and that's a problem that, for all the reasons Kenny said, the fact that Israel has responded is a very big deal. That means Iran is going to respond, and they didn't respond by going after a proxy. Israel did not respond by going after a proxy, which I thought was maybe one way they would do it. They're going directly for Iran, which we can discuss what that means. And maybe can I make there's some points I wanted to make as a result of what Kenny was saying. Can I go into that? And it's very important what you just told us, Eduardo. So that's good to feature this in. So there's a few things people have been wondering about, which is, will this become a regional war? And what I have to say to people is, this is already a regional war. And I want to show you something, because it kind of came up by talking to Jake, and I realized this is really true. Just want to show people a map. So, as people know, fuck you and all this bullshit that comes up. We've been talking a lot about Ukraine and the war there between Russia and the proxy war between the United States, really, United States, NATO, and Russia. And that's right here, right? This is all taking place right here. And right here is the Black Sea. And if you just go a little bit south of the Black Sea, Turkey, Syria, and here you are with Israel and Jordan. And right next here is Iran, right? These are where the missiles are flying here. And right up here, north of that, there's missiles flying. This is already a regional war. And it's in that region. And when people, so why do I believe we're already in World War III? And why do I think that there's, let me stop this here. I think I can stop sharing. Because people are, in talking about these two conflicts, are always talking about off-ramps. And they're talking about off-ramps because they think these are singular conflicts that we may get out of them. And what seems to keep happening is there seem to be no off-ramps. And in fact, what seems to be happening is there are more and more on-ramps for more countries to get involved. And that's what tells me that we are in the beginning of process of a world war-like process, is we are going to see more and more on-ramps to conflicts and fewer off-ramps. And of course, people should look for off-ramps, but people should understand that the capitalist classes that are involved in this, I believe, can't find off-ramps unless that off-ramp means victory at the end. And if it doesn't mean victory at the end, they don't get off. And that's the stakes. And the war in Ukraine right now is going very poorly for NATO and the United States. And one of the things that's happening, and the reason I'm talking about this is because these are connected conflicts, because this isn't, in my opinion, just between Israel and Iran. Iran is a proxy for Russia and China, and ultimately China is the power behind that side. And of course, Israel is the proxy for the United States. And here's what this recent events tell me, is Ukraine a year ago was able to defend its skies. They were able to defend their cities from attacks, the plane attacks, and they were able to neutralize and minimize the number of planes flying over their soldiers along the front. That's no longer happening. And how did that come about? It came about from a strategy of attrition that Russia was using, of continuing to just pile more and more surface, things that would go after their air defense systems, targeting the air defense systems, getting them to use up all their missiles, use up their Patriot missiles, sending drones this way and that, not with the idea that, oh, we're destroying you now, but we're wearing you out. And this is what has happened, is they've attrited Ukraine. And the United States knows, and Iran knows, when they send a volley like this, they know that U.S. knows you cannot indefinitely supply Israel with the defense that it has. We're just starting. This is like year 2021 in Ukraine. We can start this process right now and begin to wear you down, so where you can defend your stuff right now, but you won't be able to defend it later. And so China, Russia, and Iran, I do believe, understand this really is a single front war, where they're going to use these methods of using up their opponent's stuff and basically out producing them. And the question, the side that has the biggest advantage around production right now is Russia, China, Iran. They are far outstripping NATO and the United States. And in the same way that people wondered, well, when Israel does its stuff, like when Israel bombed that embassy, which is Iranian territory, it's like when people hear about diplomatic immunity, that's what it means. It's like your embassy is literally a piece of that country in another country. So when they did that, they knew that they were attacking Iran, just like they did right now. And I believe that they consulted the United States, and the United States said, go for it. And then we have to ask why. Well, maybe they didn't think Iran was going to do anything, but Iran did do something. And I would ask, did Iran consult Russia and China when they did this? And I would say, yes, they did. And I think Russia and China said, you can do this, because we now believe, Russia and China now believes, that they can defeat Israel and the United States in a conventional war. I don't think they would let them go forward with this if they thought that they weren't ready. And so what it means now, as a result of these last year or two of conflict, is Russia and China believe they are ready to challenge U.S. militarily, short ultimately of a nuclear exchange. But they know that they have nuclear bombs, and the United States has their nuclear bombs. And if they stay out of nuclear, Russia and China believe that they can win. And I actually think they're right. I believe that their side is stronger and will actually grow stronger through the course of the coming years. And this is why I think the U.S. has to do something. And this is why ultimately we're coming to believe that the U.S. is saying, oh, we won't support you, we won't do this. I don't believe that. And I believe that this may be the method by which the U.S. draws itself into that regional war. And I don't mean the Israeli region, just Israel. I mean the entire regional war. This may be the way that the United States and the West can justify having its planes and its resources directly confront the Russian resources, which is something that they have to do. Macron's been talking about it. The U.S. has been talking about it. If they don't do this, then they have to admit defeat in Ukraine. And if they get defeated in Ukraine, defeat is coming in the same region in relationship to Israel and Iran and all that. And so I believe that Israel did, and what is happening right now is because the U.S. is basically wants to get in a war with Iran, because if they have a war with Iran, that's when Russia is going to have to come to Iran's defense. And this allows U.S. to directly confront a power that they are not able to get the excuse to do. And I do think it's through this conflict that the U.S. is maybe thinking, well, maybe we can force, using our own resources, force Russia to back down. Because right now the U.S. is getting throttled, and they have to change the game. And they're not going to be able to change the game by raising $60 billion for weapons that don't even exist. The only way they're going to be able to change the game in short term is to directly confront their opponent. And I think this region is where the possibility lies for U.S. and the West, as they just did, Russia, Britain, United States, all fighting to shoot down things. This is a region where I think they can get their foot in the door, where they can directly go after Russian stuff, whether that be defense stuff, whether that be stuff on the ground, stuff in the skies, stuff in the seas. This may be the way that by fighting Iran, the U.S. can feel like it can directly fight Russia, and that's what will happen. And so that's how I'm looking at this now, as a singular regional war that the U.S. knows that the only way it's going to change the conditions they can't surrender in Ukraine. People think, oh, it's getting so bad they're going to have to surrender. I don't believe they can. And so the U.S. is going to have to find a way to get something in there that will change the game. And that's what this looks like to me.
And maybe just to kind of add, having young listeners in mind, this doesn't happen because they just hate each other. Like this is happening because they're in a battle for the domination of the market system, right? In markets, in territory, and influence, right? Like this is not just because Israel hates Iran, because that's how it's portrayed, right? Like they've had like a beef, and that. And this is one thing that I don't agree with Scott Ritter at all, where he keeps talking about honor and deranged people, deranged Netanyahu, as if like these conflicts happen just because of one crazy person, that leads an entire nation into battle. No, this happens because ruling classes, have something at stake here, because the people who actually govern, they have to commit in a winner take all system, right? Like in again, like this prospect of what you're saying of, because I do agree with you, like from everything that I've heard and like the pieces that I put together, yes, the US is on its heels, and they don't have the capacity to engage in the type of industrial warfare that has been demonstrated in Ukraine, right? And that the Russians have the dominant hand now, worldwide, I would say, with China, waiting in the background, like they're the factory of the world, for fuck's sake. And then, and so the U.S. is on its heels. So what does that mean, right? Like you talked about conventional warfare, but the U.S. doesn't have enough people. They cannot recruit people. So what does that mean for us, right? Like, because we can look at it from like this is happening over there, but then like we have to pay attention, because this is gonna come in bite us all. Like they're gonna have to get people behind their project, right? Like they have to, in some ways, and makes me think of the return of, again, quote unquote, terrorism. In to initiate a patriotic feeling for people in this nation to join the cause, and especially when you're talking about warfare of that scale, right? Because openly joining that conflict means like producing things at a mass scale, dying at a mass scale, right? In and also something that I think, this is another reason China and Russia and Iran have an upper hand, because they understand, right? Like what we've talked about, when like the capitalist system is gearing towards warfare, right? There is like a synthesis of public and private, right? Like, and so the state is strong in those countries. The state can mobilize people. And so the US is going to have to do that in order to produce at the scale they need to. And so what does that mean for us? Like, so little things like passing the surveillance bullshit that they're trying to pass right now, to go after more people, and or whatever nefarious shit they have. But they're gonna have to tighten the noose on people in this country. They're gonna tighten the noose on dissent. They're gonna have to bombard us with more propaganda, and create events. Really, every major war the U.S. has joined has been joined by a false event, a false flag, right? Event that the U.S. is behind it. When you talk about 9/11, Vietnam, what other events are there, Lipson?
A ton, but yes, I would agree with that. Virtually
You know,
everyone is with some kind of lie where the
Pearl
U.S. is
Harbor,
actually behind what they did.
Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, 9/11. There's, even if you don't believe like 100% that the U.S. did it, there's a lot of very deep questions if you actually look at those events, and so, but again, that will affect us directly. This is not something that just, yes, at the moment, there is, proxies, right? Like the Ukrainians are being thrown into the meat grinder, like we've talked about before. Israeli Palestinians are already in the meat grinder. Israelis might be next. And so on and so on. And but eventually, like they will have to engage. The major powers that are behind all this. That are the ones who are fighting for the biggest stakes on the game.
And one thing though to say about Israel's conflict with their attack on Hamas and the Palestinians is, again, as much as there's been a huge body count, most of the news I've been getting that I believe is basically saying Israel has actually find itself much more drained as a result of what it's attempted to do in going after Hamas, and they're finding themselves not able to sustain this war effort. And actually, again, I think each time the side that's finding itself on the lower scale, on the lower end of this thing, is all on the Western side, over and over again, and it's coming up. They come up short, and that means, and I believe their opponent sees that, is responding to that, and is now saying, "We know we can beat you." That's how I look at what Iran has done, and I think they're right, as long as this thing doesn't go nuclear. And the Ray McGovern is somebody who I've listened to talk. He's a former CIA guy, and he shares the same thing I share, which he said he's very concerned that a false flag is on the horizon, and he's very concerned that that false flag is a nuclear false flag coming from the Western side. He just says these people are completely capable of doing such a thing to galvanize a war effort. I share that concern. I'll just say that. Other people say that that's not what they think about, but I definitely think about that.
And again, just beating a dead horse by going back to COVID, right? Like, to me, like the people who are on the freedom stuff, right? Like, maybe if you don't already know how far, the people who rule us are willing to go, like, I don't know what else to tell you. Like, yeah. And so you can't get behind any part of this project, because there's traps everywhere, to funnel us into what they're trying to do, and shape this new world, because we are the new world. There is no question that we live in a multipolar, world of, that is taking shape, and remember the Second World War, right? We thought, that the Russians helped, the Soviets helped the West really defeat the Nazis, and look at what happened afterwards. And like, alliances are as good as long as they're helpful, right, for anybody. Mm-hmm. And so, like you've said it plenty of times, we talked about it, like there is no true friendships, among nations, and so yeah, I mean, and now I guess it's what Eduardo said before, these tectonic movements, right, are happening, and people, nations are picking sides. You have to, and like you said, there is less off ramps, and I think that's what you're referring to, right? More and more countries are going to have to come into the fold, because even economically, right, like the U.S. in China, they have been economically decoupling, like this, that's because that was the reason that I've heard of people arguing that there wouldn't be a war between China and the U.S., that because the economic ties, but that decoupling has been happening, and so I think of Latin America, I think of other countries, Africa is already like, China and Russia have a lot of influence there. In Latin America, it's gonna come under more pressure too, in different ways, to join the American, side of the effort for war.
And I don't think they will.
I've been thinking about why hasn't, my feel is, and you may disagree, but that there is, the public in the USA isn't very supportive of Israel's attack on Palestine, whether it's on the left or the right. And that's something, I've been just feeling, whether it's US America first kind of ideal, why are we spending so much money outside? We should probably, the kind of rhetoric is we should probably take care of our own borders and take care of the invasion and whatever, and not be out there doing stuff with other countries, and either that kind of thinking or progressive fake support solidarity for Palestinians. And in this time of elections, I feel as if the USA has tried to persuade Israel not to continue their colonization, their occupation of Palestine, and this is my assessment, and I think Israel is so emboldened because they know that they could easily align themselves with someone else. They could align themselves with another superpower, and that is one of the superpowers in the Middle East. Israel is very strong, even if it is a small country, and so it has nothing else to do but concede to Israel's demands, or as Netanyahu has said several times. Sometimes even with their best friends, they will disagree with their good friends, and they'll just do it as they will. And so the only thing I'm seeing in all of this is how much there is a play of whose side you will be on if you don't do or if there isn't a way to get it your way, So, I mean, that's how I think of it, and I've been wondering why the USA hasn't put more pressure. Well, it has, but why there isn't a very strong sentiment to be out there again in the Middle East, and here we are. Being dragged because of the power of alliances, the power of needing to be friends with, gathering as much support as you can, whether it be NATO, whether it be strategic points in the Middle East, or whether it's being finding strategic points in the East, Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. All these areas are areas that are strategically needed to build your empire, to be strong. And you're not going to let go of your friends, even if your public feels a strong sentiment against it. That's how I feel. I'm not sure if that might be your assessment for both of you.
Let me see if I got it right, though, in terms of the thing you're wondering if we agree with, or if I agree with, is whether or not the sentiment within the United States is not that strong. The U.S. people do not have a big appetite for going to war in that region. I agree with you. I mean, I think there are some liberals and there are some conservatives who are, and those people are pretty much captured by the Democratic Party and the Republican Party establishment. But I actually think they're a minority of the overall population.
Yeah.
So I do agree with you. I think that group of people, though, does not feel organized to stop these events that are moving, but I don't think the sentiment is there for it. And that's why I do believe that something's going to have to be done to engineer that sentiment into making people willing to do this. And it makes me think of like a thought experiment. I mean, here's what I would say people are going to have to prepare themselves for, in my opinion. Again, this is in my opinion, IMO. I think people have to ask themselves, if a nuclear bomb went off in London, if it went off in Seattle, if it went off in Oakland, and I survived it, would I then support my government to go after somebody after that happens? And if I do, then we are lost. Then we're doomed. Because I believe that if that was to happen, if there was some sort of device that was exploded inside of a city that was a Western city, as close as Europe, and even closer here in the United States, And if you aren't preparing yourself to say, no, I'm not going to follow my government into what they're going to do after that happens. No, I'm going to actually see you as the enemy still and say that you have to be taken down because you are the author of this event and you are the author of all this crisis that has led us to this. Then you aren't ready for what's coming, in my opinion. You have to prepare yourself for that and know that there could be a huge body count of so-called, U.S. citizens that I believe will be as a result of U.S. actions. And you have to be prepared to prepare yourself for not falling for that and holding the U.S. government and the U.S. state and the U.S. capitalist class responsible for that ultimately. And if you're not, then you will be played.
Yeah. The sad part is that if you ask me to bet, it's like it will get it done. If that happens, it will turn people into the project. Like and my biggest evidence is COVID. Like the head fixing that happened during that time, right? And actually how easy it is to make people fall in line by and large. At least enough people to go on with the something as blatantly alive. Like like, and there's still people today who look back and can't see the fucking lies that happened during that period. And same with 9/11. Like there's a lot of Jeff, and you talked about leftists from that period could turn into the American project, the racist American project, to continue its hegemony in the world, and especially in that region that we're talking about that is being fought over right now. And so that's the hard part. But yes, at least we're talking to our listeners. We're gonna have to be ready to answer that question that you just posed. And it's a tough one, right? Because what if a so-called terrorist shoots my brother? What am I gonna say then, right? Like, am I gonna be able to overcome my grief and and be more present into analyzing the situation? And the sad part is that the people who rule us understand mass psychology, and so that is definitely in play, and I don't know if it's a nuclear device, but something horrific, that hurts a lot of people, that it will be blamed on someone else. And by the time the dust settles and you realize that there is more questions, the damage is done. You're already in war in Afghanistan, in Iraq, right? Like that happened in 2001 and 2, 3, and a lot of hatred, right? A lot of racism that happened here. And I think that these games are tested constantly. Like when we're here, an increasing hate against Asian Americans, and increasing in women punching women in New York, in a bunch of things, are tested constantly on the population.
I guess I wanted to say, I think it's a little hard for me to see what some of the people in the freedom movement, or maybe world order people say regarding psyops, because these missiles aren't like just on television, right? These are known places, like they are existing. These are, whether they be targeted down or whatever. And even I'm anticipating, but I'm not looking forward to it, that reports of the explosions that we are talking about that have been breaking news came hours after Iran's foreign minister Hossein Amir Abdullahian told CNN that if Israel takes any further military action against Iran, its response would be immediate and at maximum level. I'm anticipating another attack. I mean, these aren't, yes, it's a CNN I'm reading here as I'm being updated by the breaking news, but it's not like I trust the media. It's just, I anticipate there will be more attacks, and as we are seeing things unfold, and I'm just not looking forward to it. but I'm afraid of this is the beginning of a lot of, well, maybe not the beginning, was Ukraine, the beginning of massive conflict between lots of countries. And you're right, Andy, Iran wouldn't have had the go-ahead without it consulting with other major players. I do agree with that. That is something I do agree with. It's alliance. It's not going to act on its own. It also has found friends. You know, you were going to say, Kenny.
No, I think what you're saying is important, though. That you can't. They had to have the backing of someone, right? Like, otherwise, they would be destroyed, and who's going to show up for them? I mean, and that's it. Iran is done. But the thing that I want to focus on is that these proxies, right? Because I think that gets missed a lot in the propaganda, that, or at least it's purposely dismissed as that Israel is acting on its own. That Israel has like a bad government, a group of Zionists that are just deranged, that that are illogical, that they're going against the American will. And I think to some degree there is, like, obviously they have their own goals, their own ruling class has their own intentions, but more than anything, I bring it back to markets and territory in ocean access. The reason that Israel is so important and Egypt is so important is because the Suez Canal is there. It's a short access, right, of oil to European markets and American markets. It's a shortcut, and so I just wanted to highlight that, to make sure that Israel, there is no. The U.S. is not resisting Israel. The U.S. is actually giving in public or public statements. They do say, we whatever condemn this bullshit, but they're still sending the weapons that they have to feed Israel, because Israel without American support, they're nothing. At least that's my understanding. Like, without American support, Israel is nothing. That's why I say that they are the standing army of the American project.
And to say that the United States, without Israel present in that region, loses a gigantic piece of its military operation, economic operation, surveillance operation in that area. So Israel knows we are the essential ally. That's why Israel does have a big say. It's not just because of AIPAC. It's because that region right there, that country right there, has established itself as so important to the U.S. dominance of the globe and dominance of the resources in that region.
And the British understood this before that, right? Like, when they controlled that land, and again, to the whole regional conflict, it already is. Look at all the countries involved. Like, not just the Ukraine, like you said before, and Israel and Iran, but the Houthis are involved, right? Like, from Yemen. Saudi Arabia hasn't shown a lot of public, face on this, but they are there, or they're. I think they're, making their decision. But you have Israel, the Houthis, you have Iran, you have Ukraine. Sorry, what else? What was I saying? The United Arab Emirates is somewhat involved now. So there's Jordan now, right? Because they weren't really officially active in this.
Yep.
There's Syria, there's Lebanon, right? So there's plenty of countries involved in this, and it's already growing, and so again, it's already a regional thing, and it's already and it's growing. And what I'm waiting to see is where Europe falls into this, because they're kind of like third party to this, right? But I don't know. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
The European ruling class is going straight in with the United States and Israel. They can't back out now. That once they let the United States destroy their pipeline and said, okay, it's all good, then they committed. And so again, unless there is a revolution in Europe, the European ruling classes are going to go in with the United States and what in the direction that Israel is going, and that was shown with France and Britain being so ready and willing to shoot down the Iranian drones. So they're not backing out of this. They're gearing up for it. And Macron, with his statements of how do we get NATO prepared and how do we build up our military, which is what's going to be said by Trump. How does Europe build its military up? Those are all preparations for a bigger war.
Yeah. I don't have much to say other than, do you want to add anything else, Sandy?
Other than to say that I believe this can be stopped, but I don't believe it can be stopped without revolutionary change. Like, all our institutions are going to have to be taken down and replaced by new institutions. The things that people are talking about in terms of building an alternative system, and I don't believe you're going to be able to do it by building an alternative blockchain or an alternative internet. That system, as we saw, they're literally taking it over and giving it over. It's already been given over. It is the government's. We are operating here in government territory. But I think the opportunity to stop this is, I do believe the the sands of the hourglass, I do think are filtering through. I don't think it's happening tomorrow, and I actually think I get a sense that there are steps that we will see, and I suspect, in my opinion, we will see limited nuclear war before we see global nuclear war, in my opinion. But we can stop this, but we have to commit to taking down our own institutions and our own government. And if we lose sight of that, if we start to think that immigrants crossing a border are a problem, or terrorists are a problem, that are somebody outside of our government, then you are getting played. You are being taken away from the truth of what you must realize, which is your biggest enemy, the biggest factor you must fear are the people in your own house who are running that house. And that house has to be, a new house must be built, and we must leave this house, and we're going to probably have to do it on top of this territory. And that to me is revolution. We're far away from that, but that's what has to happen. That's the only way I see us getting out of this. One last thing I'll say, and this is for our friend Jake, right? Who comes and talks here, John Kleisik. I do believe he looks at these actions and he says, yes, those are real missiles being fired, and thinks that the real missiles being fired are still part of an operation to get everyone to fear this nuclear war. And in the fear of the nuclear war, they will be able to be herded into global government, global religion, as a way of getting away from national rivalries. That's the scenario they state. Now, Jake, I think himself says it is possible they could fuck up and still have a nuclear war. But he would say that these tensions that are being ratcheted up are being ratcheted up intentionally to push us into accepting something else that is being hidden, and doesn't see this as an expression of actual real tension building up within the system, which is, I think, how Kenny and I would describe it. And I'm not going to minimize that. I'm just going to say that's not the way I see it. But I can see how people see it that way, because so many times they've been lied to. When you think of Lahaina and when you think of 9/11, and you think of all these different operations that our government has done to push us into something else. What is it? Problem, then crisis, reaction, something, and that's what I think that the other folks who don't agree with what's going on, but don't worry about, if you, in a sense, say, I'm not worried about nuclear war, I'm worried about, global technocracy taking over, and us taking it on to try to escape nuclear war.
I just wanted to say that I happen to see that global technocracy is a result of the crisis in the system that they're trying to manage. That they have to, that this will come along with the biggest battles, that come down to brute force. And so that's how I consolidate these two somewhat, different directions that I think people take, right? Like that, the system is in crisis. They have to prepare to manage individuals, but in the process, there is a big game being played for markets and for resources and for power, and so that's how I see. That's how I construct my cake.
Yeah.
That and that's why I say I don't know what will come first. Because I do see like the necessity of squeezing individuals, but I do see, like you said, this how the system operates and how, like, so. But I don't know which one will come out first.
And Eduardo, if you wouldn't mind, can I respond to that a little bit?
Yeah.
I would say, in my opinion, I love Jake, and I respect Jake, and I agree with him on a lot. But I believe his viewpoint, and that viewpoint is coming from a notion that policy and people decide the course of history. And I don't believe that. I believe that the economic system is what produces the way and the class divisions that are a result of that. And so I think, in my opinion, his world can be understood in terms of the decisions of a set of people. And in his case, I think it's like these secret orders that do exist. He's not wrong. And I don't believe they have control of their system. Because I believe the system is what is in play here. Capitalist system, division between capitalist class and working class, and a system based on profit that all these individuals within them are subordinate to, and its logic will go in a particular direction. And that's why I think I don't think those two can come together. I think they are ultimately two different views of how the world operates. Now we can be together trying to fight for revolution, but we're looking at two different worlds, in my opinion.
No, that's definitely yeah. It's about giving powers to institutions, and I think it diminishes the brute force aspect that's built into the system. At least for me, that is becoming more evident, and yeah. But I think thank you for explaining that, because that difference between Jake and our view, I guess.
Well, we'll see. I mean,
we're still taking a guess, right?
Yes, yeah, and neither of us is looking is. I mean, Jake himself is not optimistic about that future. That global technocracy that he's talking about is awful. It's a complete tyranny that, and a more complete prison that we all live in. And but that's not the end game that I'm worried about.
I think
I'm worried about a different horror movie.
And like I said, for me, it's part of the process. It's part of the whole cake. It's a tool in the process of moving pieces to do what you have to win the game.
Yep.
All right. I think that was a lot of doomsday stuff.
And Jacob and David, if you made it this far, you should go to bed, and we're going to try to make the world better for you.
No, they're part of it. We talked about this. They're part of it too.
Part of what do you mean?
The whole system, you in the past you said that we talked about the youth being the future, but
yeah,
it's also us. We're part of this world,
Yep.
Old, young, everyone.
Yep.
And like there is things to fight for. That's what I would tell them.
Yep.
Like, yes, this is the worst case scenario, but life is worth fighting for. That's
true. And I agree with what Eduardo said about prior to fleeing the cities, in my opinion, to survive the bombs falling. I think we have to stand and figure out how to build a fight in wherever we're living, and in whatever community. Which really, before you build a fight, I do think you have to build something worth fighting for.
Yeah, and I hope we can find joy in the process, because I think that's important.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyhow. All right. Well, let's take us out. That does it for this week's episode. What's Left is a weekly political podcast / channel challenging the mainstream left. We post information about our topics and our guests on the episode notes where we found this episode, or on our blog at what'sleftpodcast.com. You can find past episodes to this podcast / channel there and connect with us. Remind folks, if you fancy anything you have heard here, please subscribe, rate, review, turn on your notifications to any of our platforms on Spotify, iTunes Podcast, Bitchute, Odysee, Rumble, Telegram, and you can find our blog and any of those links in the episode notes where we found this episode. If you would like to give us feedback about something you've heard or suggest something for us to cover, contact us through our blog. Apparently, middle schoolers are also contacting us at our blog. I'm Eduardo Barca with co-hosts Andy Lipson and Kenny Cepeda, and you can always check us out on the next episode. Thank you all for listening. Ciao, ciao.